Welcome everyone to theScore Fantasy Football Podcast presented by Subway. I'm your host, Justin Boone, the lead fantasy analyst at theScore. Joining me as always, my co-host, David P. Woods, a man who wrote the trade deadline winners and losers column for theScore this week. And Woods, I hope you're ready to bring your opinions on it because we're going to talk a lot about the fallout from those trades.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was covering it all day yesterday with theScore's NFL staff. That was a very exciting trade deadline that sort of made you realize, oh, this is what fans of other sports get to do every year. Basically, finally, some of that's come over to the NFL. So it was tons of fun, and I do have a few opinions I will happily share with you.
Good stuff. It's been a little better the last couple years in the NFL. Let's hope it keeps going that way. On today's episode, we are going to preview Week 9 with another one of the top rankers in the industry, Pat Fitzmaurice. And we've been so fortunate. We have had fantastic guests on the podcast this year, and this is another one. It's great. We're going to get Pat's thoughts on all the big questions heading into Week 9, all of the big questions that came up from those trades, how it's going to affect different players around the league. And then we are going to give you some of the players that we think are being overlooked heading into Week 9. But first, a reminder, if you like what you're hearing, make sure you're subscribing to the podcast on whatever podcast platform that you're listening to us on. And if you are, give us a rating and give us a review. So our guest today, as I mentioned, Pat Fitzmaurice, the host of the Fitz on Fantasy podcast, a contributor over at thefootballgirl.com, and you can find him on Twitter at Fitz_FF. Pat, it's great to have you.
Oh, gentlemen, what a great honor to be the guest of David P. Woods and the man I am perpetually chasing in the Fantasy Pros rankings, Justin Boone. Great to be on with you guys.
I could say the same about you. I was on the Fantasy Pros podcast not that long ago, and Mike Tagliere introduced me as one of the most accurate rankers in the history of Fantasy Pros. And I had never heard it put that way before, but you're right there with me. I'd introduce you the same.
Well, thanks, man. But it is true. There are a lot of guys whose rankings I respect and opinions I respect. But if I have a tough call in one of my own leagues, I narrow it down to 3 people whose rankings I'll check to help break a tie in my mind. And that's Sean Corner, who's won it 3 years running, John Paulson, and Justin Boone. I mean, you guys are my ultimate jury if I have a really tough decision in one of my leagues. So, and so far you guys have not let me down.
Well, that is very, very kind of you to say. So let's combine all of our fantasy knowledge here, see if we can help owners get a win in Week 9. And let's start off with all the trades. So there's so many fantasy angles to take coming off of that trade deadline. There was a lot of different players moved and a lot of impact on the fantasy landscape. Let's start with Demaryius Thomas, though, because not many players get traded and then that very week get to go up against their former team. And in Denver, nonetheless, it's going to be really interesting to see. Obviously, the Texans were looking to replace Will Fuller. Thomas is a completely different player, of course, doesn't have the speed to take the top off like Fuller does. And, Kiki Kuti missed last week. We're going to see whether he's going to be able to play this week or not. Hopefully it's not going to be a long-term injury with him. But what do you think, Pat? What do you think the outcome is going to be here for Thomas? How's he going to fare against his old team? And how's it going to impact that Texans offense moving forward?
Yeah, it's interesting. They really needed this one after the Fuller injury. They just did not have another credible perimeter threat, and they did not want to have to resort to putting in hands of stone Sammy Coates at an outside spot. So, they add Thomas, and certainly Thomas is no longer the guy who, from 2012 to 2016 averaged almost 100 catches a year, almost 1,400 yards a year, almost 10 touchdowns a year. They know they're not getting that Demaryius Thomas. This is a guy who's turning 31 in December, and but he does give them that credible other outside threat. And, it's quite an interesting quirk of scheduling that he would face the Broncos, as you mentioned. I don't really have a great deal of enthusiasm for him this week just because he's changing teams, although I do think there's a pretty strong likelihood that the Texans will hold out Kiki for this week. And, with the bye coming up next week, just make sure that hamstring is sound and keep him off the field until week 11. I think I have Demaryius at wide receiver 38 for this week. Not sure how many snaps he's going to run, or if they are going to be able to, give him the full package of their offense, or if they're just going to have certain plays, like a limited suite of plays for him. But going forward, I think he's going to be like kind of a wide receiver 3, not unlike his value with the Broncos. He gets the quarterback upgrade going from Case Keenum to Deshaun Watson, but changing teams in the middle of the season is probably a little bit of a value hit. So it probably comes out in the wash. I wouldn't be that excited about using him this week.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I do think wide receiver 3 is probably what we're looking at this week, and moving forward. He does have some touchdown upside in this offense, and, the quarterback upgrade cannot be understated, like you said. I'm not overly excited about him, though. I don't think it makes a huge impact on DeAndre Hopkins. I think I'm a lot less excited about Kiki Kuti, and it's very unfortunate because I put in a nice bid for him a week ago before this trade went down. So I was a little bit sad that the trade happened. But what's your take on all this?
I think you guys mostly nailed it. Normally I would say stay far, far away from a receiver changing teams midweek. There's not enough time to get the playbook and sort of get worked into the offense. But I'm just sort of letting myself buy into the idea that he's going to want to get some sort of revenge against the Broncos, and that he's a savvy veteran. The Texans are going to have some amount of plays scripted for him, and those will probably be about around the red zone, give him a shot at a touchdown there. So I wouldn't stay totally away from him here. As far as Cutie goes, I think we'd probably all agree that he's now likely to sort of slide into that Will Fuller role and do some version of that. I mean, Cutie does have deep speed. They weren't really using him that way earlier in the season because they had Fuller in that spot, but I think that's the expectation there, and that probably leaves Thomas as third in the pecking order eventually when it all shakes out, because that's how highly I think of Cutie going forward.
All right, so what about on the other side of the field in this game? Because the biggest beneficiary of that Thomas trade by far was Courtland Sutton. It's great to see. I mean, Thomas was averaging 7 targets per game this season. Sutton saw an average of around 4 per game the last 3 weeks, and yet he was still outproducing Thomas during that stretch. Sutton had 164 yards and a touchdown. Thomas had just 129 yards and a touchdown. Emmanuel Sanders is probably going to see a slight uptick in targets here, but with Demaryius gone, Pat, do you believe, like I do, that Sutton is now going to be locked into fantasy lineups?
Oh yeah, the runway is clear for Sutton now, and I think the numbers only tell so much of the story with him, because I think he does have a catch rate below 50% right now. Although the 19.1 yards per catch is pretty attractive, but just some of the catches he's made, like on this limited target load, like the blowout they had on Thursday night a couple weeks ago, where he catches the option pass from Emmanuel Sanders and just lays out in the end zone for an overthrown ball. He's made some real circus catches this year, and you can just kind of tell he's a guy like, and I've mentioned this before, he sort of reminds you of Kenny Golladay last year, where you could just see it, and there's something obviously really good percolating here, and it looked like he wasn't going to get the full opportunity to make the leap forward and play that alpha receiver role until maybe next year. And I guess Emmanuel Sanders still is the alpha receiver there, but now they have a pretty skinny target tree, I guess you could say. They don't really have a tight end who catches a lot of balls. They don't have much beyond Sanders and Sutton, just like Deshaun Hamilton, another rookie. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. I mean, I think I've got him like in the mid-20s for this week, like wide receiver 25 or so, and he's looking like a pretty solid wide receiver too the rest of the way. I think he's a guy you want in lineups every week. Totally agree. Woods?
Yeah, I think I'm with you guys. I wonder if maybe there's just a little bit of romanticism about what he's going to be at this point, just because he's so young and exciting. I mean, are we expecting significantly higher numbers than what Demaryius Thomas was putting up there. I'm not sure about that. Like Pat said, he's still sort of second in the pecking order there with Emmanuel Sanders. And in a week where there are sort of some other young receivers who are also interesting, we just talked about Cutie. I mean, you could go out and get DJ Moore. There's Traquan Smith available on some waiver wires. I saw some big bids going out for Courtland Sutton this week, and I sort of thought maybe the safer play is to go more conservative and target one of those other guys like a Moore who maybe has, a similar level of upside. But I can't hide, like, I'm also excited about what Sutton's going to do.
Yeah, and I think with Moore, I'm also excited. You for sure could have got him for a lower bid this week. I saw that happen in almost every league. But Sutton's also shown the touchdown upside there, right? And that's big. And we haven't totally seen that from Moore yet. We've seen him come on a little bit, especially last week with more playing time. But I think Sutton, right now, I have him as more of a high-end wide receiver 3 with that wide receiver 2 upside. But I definitely think that's a ceiling that he could hit for sure at some point in the rest of the season. Let's talk about another wide receiver trade. Golden Tate going to the Eagles. Demaryius Thomas has the 33rd most fantasy points among wide receivers this year. Golden Tate has the 22nd most points among wide receivers in fantasy. And unlike Thomas, though, I mean, Tate isn't going to see that much of an upgrade at quarterback. It's, probably fairly similar Stafford to Wentz. There's also more overall talent in that Philly wide receiver core that he's going to have to contend with here. So it's going to be interesting to see how he fits into the mix. He gets a bye week when he goes over there now, so it's going to give him a little bit of time to get acclimated with that team. But, Pat, what's your take? Do you see Tate's numbers rising, falling, going to the Eagles?
I think falling a little bit. I don't think Tate owners can be too happy about this. Not only do they get a second bye week that, sort of a lump of coal in the stocking, but it is, just a murkier target picture. Not that he didn't have some target competition in Detroit, obviously, with Golladay and Marvin Jones, but, he was still, even with those guys around, even with Detroit getting their running game revved up for a change, Tate was still on pace for 101 receptions and almost 1,200 yards. And now he has to share targets with Alshon Jeffrey, Nelson Aguilar, and stud tight end Zach Ertz, who, like Tate, also does most of his damage in the middle of the field. So, I kind of have a hard time seeing this as a positive for Tate. I mean, it's a great thing for Wentz having this extra, sharp arrow in his quiver, but I can't see Tate benefiting from this. I think he's still a guy you're going to have to consider for your lineup every week. It's not someone you're going to just relegate to the bench because of this, but I do think it's a bit of a knock.
I think I agree there, and I just sort of the theory that I have is just that the Eagles are sort of taking the same approach they did last year with running backs when they went out and traded for Jay Ajayi just to platoon him with LeGarrette Blount and Corey Clement. Sort of just, we can't have enough of these guys on our roster. I wonder if they're taking a similar approach here with Tate. He wasn't that expensive to go acquire. He sort of fills a need, but it's not really a need because Nelson Aguilar does some of the same things. He plays most of his snaps in the slot, so does Tate. So now the Eagles, they're a deeper roster, but I wonder if it's sort of, those are targets that are going to go away from Tate's season total and Aguilar's. It's, as you said, it's an uptick for Wentz and it's an uptick for the offense overall, but I wonder if sort of they're going to platoon wide receivers a little bit there.
Yeah, we're talking about a guy in Tate that, 10 targets a game is what he was averaging, just under 10 targets a game in Detroit. I just don't see that happening in Philly for him. Now, you could argue that, the success of the offense, maybe he'll get some red zone opportunities and stuff, but I just don't think it's going to happen for him at that level. That's why I brought up that he's 22nd right now in fantasy points among receivers. I think he's going to fall back closer to that Demaryius level, closer into that wide receiver 3 range moving forward. But that has to lead us to the Lions offense, and I think it actually is pretty exciting for these guys. Kenny Galladay's been emerging. Marvin Jones has been an outstanding wide receiver who maybe hasn't been getting as much work prior to last week. He had a pretty big game, but they've been locked into a 3-way battle with Tate here for a while, and now that's going to free up a little bit for them. I know Dave Burkett of the Detroit Free Press was suggesting that undrafted free agent Brandon Powell is going to be the guy that they've ticketed to slot into that Tate into the Tate role, but I really think this is great news for Golladay and for Jones. We saw what Jones could do when he gets the opportunities last week. He had the huge game. We've also seen guys like Michael Roberts come on. He scored a couple touchdowns recently, but you have to think that Golladay and Jones are going to scoop up most of those targets here. Pat, where do you have these guys ranked this week?
Right now, I have Golladay wide receiver 15 and Jones wide receiver 18, I believe. And it's it's not the best matchup. These guys go into Minnesota, but with Tate not there, I mean, it's such a target windfall. And like you said, Justin, I mean, maybe there's a little bit of a spillover to, the other receivers. They have TJ Jones or the guy, and I already forgot his name, that Burkett mentioned as a possible third receiver now. Theo Riddick, Luke Wilson, Michael Roberts. But really, it should mean a lot more action for Golladay and Jones. And, it's great that Golladay is getting this opportunity. A very talented guy, and we've seen pretty disappointing numbers from him the last 2 weeks, and that's sort of the roulette aspect to that situation when there were three guys there. That Marvin Jones had weeks where he disappeared. Golladay has just disappeared for a couple weeks. Tate was really the only guy who was kind of steadily getting catches and targets every single week. But now I think you feel a lot more comfortable with Golladay and Jones and their floors. Their floors have definitely been elevated.
And sometimes it's not just great for fantasy owners, but fantasy rankers like ourselves. I had a lot of headaches trying to figure out those three. And as they were running the ball more, which is definitely something that's happened a little bit more in Detroit this year, it was becoming even more difficult to figure out, okay, well, they were all kind of close to that wide receiver 2 range. And then you had to figure out, well, who's going to get bumped down to wide receiver 3 or potentially even lower. Now, confidently, we can put them in that wide receiver 2 range.
Yeah, I think maybe you can even project more than Tate's 10 targets per game to be distributed amongst Detroit's receivers, because if I have the stat, remember correctly, from weeks 4 to 8, they ran the fewest offensive plays in the NFL. That's kind of a weird stat. I mean, they kind of just want to run a lot and control the game that way, but I think that's going to increase going forward. It almost has to. So you're looking at sort of a two-pronged thing for Golladay and Jones, where they're getting Tate's targets split amongst them and just increased passing targets that weren't there before. So arrow's pointing way up for those guys.
Yeah, and early in the season. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, can I ask the two of you where you have them ranked? I noticed a lot of rankers have them adjacent to each other, and I think there's a little bit of air between them. I kind of think Golladay is going to be the alpha guy, and Jones more the complementary guy. Not that he's far behind, but maybe like almost an AJ Green, Tyler Boyd type of thing. Do you have them like really close to each other, or is there a little bit of a gap?
There is zero gap. I have Kenny Golladay at wide receiver 17. I have Marvin Jones at wide receiver 18. And now that's constantly going to change. And tonight I'm going to spend a lot of time on the rankings, tomorrow as well, before I put up the update on Thursday. But I think they're going to end up right in that range next to each other. I do like Golladay better this week, but it's going to be pretty close every single week. And I own Jones. Unfortunately, I wish I had Golladay more spots, but I own Jones in a lot of leagues, and I was very excited to see this trade go down.
Yeah, same here. I've got Jones in quite a few leagues.
I think I'm in line with both you guys. I don't see a huge difference between the two of them this week or probably going forward.
So, I mean, Golladay was really breaking out too early in the season, so we know that the talent is there for that to continue. And I'd like to talk about another breakout star here. Woods, there was another trade that happened yesterday, and the person who got traded, I'm not that concerned about. We'll talk a little bit about him later, but it was Ty Montgomery going to Baltimore. We'll get to him in a minute, but this has to lead to our guy, Woods, Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones' season is here. Come on, they came off the bye last week. He saw his most carries of the year. He got 12 carries, 86 yards, and a touchdown against the Rams. This trade is surely going to open up snaps. And I feel like maybe not every episode, but almost every episode, we've been bringing up Aaron Jones. We've been talking to our guest asking, is this the week? Are they finally going to realize, is Mike McCarthy finally going to give him more work? Well, last week, we finally started to see it. Coming off the bye, Aaron Jones saw 62% of the snaps against the Rams. Jamal Williams had 25%, and Montgomery just 12%. Obviously, Montgomery had that brutal fumble at the end of the game as well, which probably contributed to him getting traded. But prior to last week, Jones was only seeing about a third of the touches there, a third of the snaps, sorry. Pat, like I said, we've asked this question a bunch, but can we finally be confident about starting Aaron Jones in fantasy?
Well, it just so happens that I am a Wisconsin native and a fan of the Green Bay Packers, of course. And so, myself and other Packers fans have been wondering what it would take for Mike McCarthy to stubbornly move off this, very evenly distributed three-headed hydra of a backfield and, finally turn to Jones a little bit more. And as it turns out, it only took Montgomery bringing that kickoff out of the end zone against coach's orders, fumbling the ball away, and denying Aaron Rodgers a chance to engineer a 2-minute drill for the win. So that's all it took. And actually, though, even before that, I mean, we saw Aaron Jones get 62% of the offensive snaps in that game versus only 25% for Williams. And, I think Montgomery was right around 20%. So it looks like that is going to be sort of the new setup, maybe a 2/3, 1/3 distribution for Jones, which is kind of in line with, what most teams do when they have a preferred guy in a two-man backfield. So, it does look like it's his backfield mostly now. I'm still a little concerned that McCarthy is going to play Williams a bit more than he should, which is why I don't think I have Jones quite in my top 20 this week. I think I've got him at running back 21 or 22. But yeah, this having Montgomery no longer in the picture and Jones looking good every time he has the ball in his hands, it seems like it's created an opportunity for him now.
Yeah, Pat basically said what I was going to say. I ticketed Jones for an increase from, let's say, 62% of the backfield work all the way up to 2/3, let's say 67%. So if that 5% increase is the difference between starting him and not starting him, I guess put him into your lineup. But I don't think it's going to be a huge difference just because Williams is so good in pass protection, and that's still important for the Packers. And maybe by week 17 we'll have our 200-yard Aaron Jones game. But I don't think it's imminent. It's going to be a slow build, and I guess we're moving in the right direction. At least we can say that.
But I think this trade just solidifies what we saw last week, right? Like if he's getting 2/3 or even 60% of the work there, he's talented enough that he can produce on that. He can give you an 86-yard, 1-touchdown day. That's a fantasy starter if we can see that consistently from him. And I think now this trade just locks that in. There's not going to be a third guy. You know what? I shouldn't even say that, though, because we know Mike McCarthy's going to come out this week and he's going to start Jamal Williams and have Jamal Williams play 60% of the snaps. And I'm just going to sit here and look foolish because Mike McCarthy seems to do that to us all year long here and for a few seasons. But I'm ready to buy in here. We've said this all year long that Jones just needed the opportunity. It needed to become more consistent. And now this trade makes that possible.
Yeah, that's definitely true, but it's just what is success now for Aaron Jones? We've been talking about him for so long. He's been built up into this sort of mythical creature where it's is 85 yards and a touchdown even enough from him? We've waited so long for it that it feels like that won't be a satisfying payoff if that's all that we get, even though, like you said, that's a useful starter every single week if he's given us that.
Yeah, he's reached superhero level now on the podcast where, we need the 200 yards every week from him. Well, we do have to talk about Ty Montgomery. We've got to round out all the trade talk there from Tuesday. Montgomery ends up going to the Ravens. Like I said, I don't think that changes much about the Ravens' backfield. It was really unfortunate the way that all ended for him in Green Bay with that fumble and everything. It was a pretty bad look. And he is a talented back. As much as we love talking about Aaron Jones, Montgomery has flashed talent. He just hasn't been able to do it over a long stretch, or he hasn't been able to stay healthy even during a long stretch to be able to produce. So I don't know. Before we move on away from all the trades from Tuesday, Pat, I don't know if you have any thoughts. If you think this changes the value at all for Alex Collins or for Javorius Allen in the Ravens backfield.
I guess really my only strong takeaway from that trade is that Kenneth Dixon is probably not going to be activated off IR. I know they were thinking that maybe there was a chance that he would be able to come back later in the season from his knee injury, but this trade kind of signals that that's probably not going to be the case now. I'm not sure if he is going to sort of threaten Buck Allen for that pass catching back role. It seems like Buck has been in the doghouse a little bit ever since he coughed up a fumble in their Week 5 overtime loss to the Browns, that memorable 12-9 game. And ever since, Buck's snaps have gone down a little and his touches have gone down a lot. So I think Collins' role is pretty secure. I really don't see Montgomery changing that. I'm less certain about what he does to Buck Allen's role, but Buck Allen, was quickly losing fantasy relevance anyway.
So one more trade, I think we should circle back to the Amari Cooper trade. And I know it didn't happen on Tuesday, happened a week ago, a little over a week ago now. But he was on bye, and now we're finally going to see his debut. It's going to happen on Monday Night Football. They're going up against the Titans. And prior to the deal, obviously, we know Cooper was a pretty big disappointment fantasy-wise, but he did have a couple big games. He's going to a team that desperately needs someone to step up in that receiving core. So, Pat, are you ready to actually trust Cooper in his debut? Do you want to see him actually do it in Dallas before you're willing to put him in your fantasy lineups?
Oh, unfortunately, I'm kind of forced to use him in the one league where I have him, where it's a lot of flex spots, and in a 16 bye week, I am just under the gun and don't really have a choice in the matter. But yeah, it's funny. Before I came on with you guys, I was looking at where I had him in the rankings, where other people had him, and I think I've got him like wide receiver 36, and I was sort of alarmed to discover that I'm higher on him than most people, who I think have him like more in the early 40s. And part of me wants to think that they are going to want to get him involved and get him a few looks and sort of build his confidence in his role in the Dallas offense. And part of me thinks it's going to be a process to, after changing teams midseason, generally not an easy thing for a wide receiver to do. Yeah, I have had a hard time wrapping my head around this one, just because it was so easy up to this point to just avoid Cowboys receivers like the plague. And is Amari now the clear number one guy, or would it surprise us all if Cole Beasley still out targeted everyone else there? So I'm not sure what to make of it. I'm forced to put him in your lineup, but I think if you have other good options, you might want to wait and see for at least a week.
Yeah, right now I'm one of those people that has him in the low 40s. I have him as wide receiver 41 right now, and I do want to see it from him first. Just, we've been so disappointed. His floor is just a week crushing, like 0 score, like 1 catch for 9 yards, and I want to see him do it in Dallas. I do think they are going to try to work him in, and I actually really like some of the games left on their schedule here. They get the Eagles twice, and we know you can throw on the Eagles. It's sort of a pass funnel. The Falcons, obviously the Falcons defense has been, the cure for every offense in the league, it seems, this year. They also have some games that are probably going to be high scoring. They're going to have to throw. You're talking about the Saints in the fantasy playoffs. They get the Colts in week 15. They get the Buccaneers in the fantasy championship too. So I think there's going to be some games where I'm going to have Cooper much higher in the rankings, but I just don't feel confident doing it this week.
I think I'm with you guys, but I also think that there will be few owners out there who have the luxury of not starting Cooper. I mean, it's unlikely that you have enough better options this week to play them. If you do, you should sit him for a week and see how he looks. But I wouldn't feel awful about putting him in the lineup, because I guess primarily I'm just pretty confident that the Cowboys are going to pepper him with targets to show off their new piece. They traded a lot for him. The Cowboys just seem to be the type of organization that likes to, that makes confident decisions and sticks with them. And I think Jerry Jones will let it be known either, directly or sort of through subtext that, yeah, Amari Cooper needs to be a big part of this offense going forward. And that likely starts this week. And it's a pretty good matchup against the Titans, who aren't a very good secondary.
Well, David makes a really good point about that. With the draft capital they spent in this deal, for Cooper to come out after a bye week and get 2 targets would, send an interesting message to the fans. So maybe he does really get peppered with targets right away.
But it's also Amari Cooper, and you can't feel super confident that even if he gets 10 targets, he's going to turn those into a whole lot. So, I mean, put him in your lineup, but I can't imagine feeling very confident about it.
I'm not sure if we helped any fantasy owners with that discussion. I think all three of us are just kind of like, well, it's possible, but maybe I think the general consensus, none of us are that confident about him this week.
Check the weekly rankings and see where he is and see if you have 3 or 4 guys better than him.
Sunday morning, we will have it figured out. By then, we will know. We were going to keep the podcast mostly to just the trade talk today, but there was another piece of news that I think we have to touch on, and that's Ryan Fitzpatrick being named the starter for the Buccaneers once again. Woods, you and I discussed Jameis and Fitzpatrick on our Week 8 recap show on Sunday night, but Pat, I'm curious how you feel about the situation, because, both players have the ability to put up, huge touchdown totals, and they both have the potential to put up huge turnover totals as well. That's definitely within the realm of possibility for Fitzpatrick here. I think everyone's romanticizing a little bit about the fact that, he's back and how great he played early in the season, but he is definitely capable of imploding in this game as well. What do you think? Do you think Fitzpatrick's going to help or hurt fantasy owners this week?
Boy, that is a good question. Is it possible to have a bigger range of outcomes than a guy like Fitzpatrick has? Because with their offense just being in complete air raid mode, really having no running game to speak of whatsoever, you've got these terrific receivers in Evans and Deshaun Jackson and Godwin, O.J. Howard, too, a fantastic tight end. It's just, if he hits the ceiling, you get what you got at the start of the year when he had 3 straight 400-yard games. But he can also, as you alluded to, commit turnovers by the bushel full. And we have seen that this coaching staff has sort of an itchy quarterback finger. So a benching after a couple interceptions is certainly he could conceivably give you negative points for the week. And boy, right now I have got him quarterback 11. I'm curious to know where you guys are on that. I've got him below the the upper tier guys and right behind Drew Brees and his not ideal matchup behind Matt Ryan, but ahead of like Phillip Rivers, Baker Mayfield, and Ben Roethlisberger. So tentatively interested in him against a kind of a pass funnel Carolina defense that's easier to throw on, I think, than run on. But you definitely are saying a prayer if you stick him in your starting lineup this week.
I'm right with you. Quarterback 11. I think there's a few things baked into that. One is the turnover potential and the chance that, who knows, maybe we'll see Jameis by the end of this game. Anything's possible. But also, I know Mike Evans injured his leg at the end of last week's game, and we haven't seen anything on that yet. We're recording this on Wednesday, so we'll have to monitor his practice participation just to make sure that he's out of the woods there and he's going to be all right and able to play, because obviously if Evans wasn't in the lineup, that would hurt Fitzpatrick for sure.
I don't have a ton to add there, but I will say I have a pretty high degree of confidence that Fitzpatrick is at least going to make it to the end of this game, because I just sort of buy into the idea that that's not Jameis's job maybe ever again, and definitely not for a few weeks here, as it would just be so embarrassing for Dirk Cutter to go back to them after another week. I think he's going to sort of live or die with Fitzpatrick, and at least for a few weeks here, if not for the rest of the season, as they sort of permanently sit down Jameis maybe.
Well, if he throws his 6th interception of the day, anything's possible.
Yeah.
What was interesting was in 2 quarterback leagues, the ones that I'm in, the fab bidding on Fitzpatrick this week was pretty impressive. There was one league where I was down to about $32, I think, and threw out a $31 bid on him, and I think I fell short by approximately $50. Someone basically blew the entire budget on Fitzpatrick.
Well, in the Dynasty League that you and I are in, Pat, I ended up having to break and give up a pick. I gave up a 3rd-round rookie pick to get Fitzpatrick. I own Jameis in that league. I did it early in the season, and after a couple games, Fitzpatrick ends up back on the bench. I thought I was kind of foolish. Now it turns out he's going to be my starter again, so hip hooray. Let's wrap it up here, and let's just talk about, and I mentioned it before, but some of the players that might be being overlooked in Week 9. And Pat, we'll give you the floor here to start.
All right, I'll throw 2 out, and I am definitely higher on this guy in rankings, I've noticed, than anyone else. If you need a streaming option this week, I'm kind of high on Case Keenum. I don't necessarily think the Demaryius trade hurts him, and he's going to be going up against an injury-riddled Houston secondary in a home game. In Houston, we just saw them allow Devontae Parker to come out of mouthballs and have 130 some yards. They have got major injury problems in the Texans secondary. And Keenum is a guy I think I've got at quarterback 15, whereas most people have him at like quarterback 21 or 22 when they're only 26 starting quarterbacks. So I think you could actually roll him out and not be too disappointed this week. And the other guy, he was supposed to be limited last week and wound up, playing a pretty full complement of snaps, or at least around 50%, and getting, I think, a season high in carries. Matt Breida. And we know he's still dealing with this ankle injury. But this is such a talented dude, and it seems like a long time has passed since the first couple weeks of the season where he just sort of went berserk and was looking like, maybe a running back one candidate. And, the primary running back in a Kyle Shanahan offense has traditionally been a pretty good thing to be from a fantasy perspective. And, he's a excellent pass catcher and a guy who can do a little damage on the ground. So, in a favorable matchup against the Raiders, he is a guy I would not be shy about rolling out this week.
Yeah, that one's going to be completely dependent on how healthy he is in that game, but so much upside for Breida. Woods, who you got?
I want to say I hope people haven't completely given up on Corey Davis, because I can sort of talk myself into the idea that this week, coming out of the bye, the Titans are going to make him a focal point of their offense. I mean, they sort of seem to want to be a running team, but that didn't really work out. They sniffed around some wide receivers at the trade deadline, if we believe the reports, but nothing came to pass there. So it's got to be Davis. I mean, they don't have a whole lot else on that team. And Marcus Mariota reportedly getting healthier now. He can feel his hand again, I think, which is probably a good thing for a quarterback. So I think Corey Davis is going to be a big part of this offense this week, as he has to be. They have to turn things around with him as the focal point, and I think this is the ideal week to do it, and they've probably spent their bye figuring out how they can make it happen.
All right, how about Jordan Howard? And I know I've talked about Howard a few times recently, and I also know that he's disappointed fantasy owners a lot this year, but he's quietly scored touchdowns in back-to-back games, and he's coming off a 22-carry, 81-yard, one-touchdown performance, and I think this week's going to be kind of similar. That game was against the Jets. This week, he's going up against the Bills, and, the Bills' defense has done all right. They're definitely the best unit on that team, but they're playing on a short week. They're 10-point underdogs at home. I think this is going to be another game where Howard's going to see a lot of work, and I have him way up. I have him as a high-end RB2, and as Pat kept mentioning, talking about the rankings versus other people, I think I'm much higher on him this week than others. If we want to go a little bit deeper, we're going to need to watch Tyreek Hill's groin injury just to see if he's going to be available or limited in any way this week, because if not, if he's going to be out, Chris Conley all of a sudden becomes very interesting as a deeper play. And obviously, Sammy Watkins would be a borderline wide receiver one in that one. But I think Chris Conley might be someone who's probably still available on most waiver wires, even after waiver wires processed. And I think most people might not realize that Hill could be hurt here. He could have to miss some time. So take a look at him if you're desperate. And I also think, Geronimo Allison came back last week, had a very quiet game in his first game back, but let's not forget how well he was playing early in the season. He was putting up a ton of yards, scoring touchdowns. I think that's still possible here. Another game where they're probably going to have to throw the ball, and he's going to be back, another week recovered. I think definitely possible that he's going to have a good game in this one. So, whether it's the, players that are being overlooked this week or all the players whose values changed because of those trades, I think you could take all this information and go out and get yourself a win this week, everybody. And make sure you are following Pat on Twitter, as we said, at @Fitz_FF, checking out his content over at thefootballgirl.com. Pat, thanks for coming on.
Oh, Justin, David, thank you so much for having me.
Woods and I will be back to break down all the Week 9 action on Sunday, and we're going to give you a first look at the waiver wire pickups for next week during that episode. If you want to get in touch with Woods, he's at David P. Woods on Twitter. To see all our fantasy content, make sure you're checking the Score app every single day. Tons of stuff on there. My rankings, start, sit columns, all kinds of great stuff. Just put up a trade value chart today as well. You can hunt me down on Twitter if you have questions, at Justin Boone. Big thanks to Pat. Big thanks to everybody out there. We'll see you next time.
Said leave on time, my baby.